welcome to the festive power rankings. As you can see by the Christmas tree that is here, it is a festive edition. Festive edition, and a week from now, it'll be more festive because we'll be entering a 3-day period of no hockey, and that'll kind of. It's not going to be the mid-season, but it'll be close. So number 31, Arizona. Zona had a chance to get out of 31 tonight if they'd beaten Pittsburgh. They were unable to do so, so they returned to 31. That drops them one spot from last week. Yes, I paid attention to last week's rankings, which means that up one spot to number 30 is Buffalo. This fight over who's going to be the worst team in the league is interesting. Buffalo right now is ahead of Arizona, but it's just barely. It's been a rough season for both teams, and that's understating it. Number 29, still 29, is Florida. They were up to 28 at one point this week. They may have been 27, but here we are, and they're back at 29. They're back where they started the week. If you're a Panthers fan, it's got to be rough seeing what Tampa's doing, just a little bit. Because this rebuild in Florida, outside of the 1 year that they won their division, it's been going on for a while. And Tampa goes through these little rebuilds, and suddenly they're cup contenders again, and it's happened more than once. Number 28, Ottawa. That's Ottawa. That's Erik Karlsson. No, I don't have the logos for all of them, so you'll just have to watch the whole video and see who these little ones are. Number 28 is Ottawa, and yeah, they hold pattern with last week as well. They actually at one point this week were down as far as 30th. Their 2 wins have pulled them up to 28th. It is hard to get out of that bottom row, but they're 28th, and at least they look to be headed in the right direction. 27. Don't tell them it's overtime. Detroit. The Detroit Red Wings, if it's overtime, they blow it. And that loss they suffered to Boston this week in overtime, where they had the 2-1 lead with a couple minutes left, that really didn't help their standing. Detroit actually drops 3 spots, so they're back in the bottom row. They've been in the bottom row before, and the way they've been playing, they could be down here for a while. Number 26, back in the bottom row based on tonight's result, the Montreal Canadiens. Montreal had been getting better and better, and over the last couple of weeks, it's started to slide again. This isn't Carey Price. This is scoring. It's a lack of scoring going on right now with Montreal. And, yeah, this whole bottom row, I don't see playoffs for any of them. And the interesting thing is, the only Western team is Arizona. All the rest are Eastern-based teams. And you've got Atlantic. That's a pretty rough division right there. So when I say that Boston might be top 3 by default, this is kind of what I'm talking about. Number 25, and these guys dropped a spot tonight based on their result, is the Colorado Avalanche. So that's Nathan MacKinnon. It's Colorado. Yeah, when it's one of these ones I don't have a double for, I'll just go ahead and show you guys. Nathan MacKinnon, Colorado. Not much to say here. Losing 6-5 at home against Tampa doesn't help. Drops them down a point. They actually lost 2 points this week. Montreal lost 4. So not a great week for Colorado. And their results have gone back to middling. And I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I know near the start of the year I had them top 10. And they've slowly started residing in these bottom 2 rows regularly. Number 24, also looking like they might be residing here permanently, are the Vancouver Canucks. They have a goaltending issue. They have injury issues now up front. And their defense is spotty. There's an issue here in Vancouver. 24th, that means they dropped 3 spots from last week. And it's legit. The win over San Jose pulled them up somewhat. And Montreal losing, Colorado losing, allowed them to stay ahead of those teams. If Colorado had won, they'd be 24. If Montreal had beat Ottawa, they'd be 25. And Vancouver would have been 26. At 23, up 4 spots, and out of the bottom row is Carolina. So Carolina, yep, they're up by 4, which is one of the highest jumps of the week. Carolina's playing well. They've won 3 in a row. And they look solid defensively. Their goaltending seems to be getting better. I still have scoring concerns with Colorado, but the rest of their team looks pretty darn solid. I don't know how much higher they can go, but the fact that the last place team in the Metro in terms of power rankings is 23rd, and there's all of these teams from other divisions shows just how strong I think they are. This is, of course, the lowest rated team on the power rankings in the Central. So if you're going by division strength, that kind of tells you something. 22nd, Philly. Philly also moves up 4 spots. Philly's on a 6-game winning streak, and they've looked pretty damn good. The only reason they're not further up is because it takes a while to dig your way out. They haven't moved further up. There's some strength of schedule that goes on. There's a lot of things that go into these when I do these rankings, but they have moved up by 4 spots. They are getting better, and the unluckiest team in the NHL that became the worst team in the NHL now looks like one of the better teams in the NHL. So it really depends on which side of the fence you're on. Are you a fan? Are you not a fan? As to which part of this equation you believe. But Philly is on the upswing. Number 21, they're up by 4 as well, is Anaheim. Anaheim has started that climb. They've started to get better. I like what Anaheim's doing. I think that with Getzlaf back, they get that much better. Their goaltending has been good. They lost tonight, but overall they're getting much better. And they lost to a very good team tonight, and they beat St. Louis this week. So Anaheim absolutely fully deserving of that 21 spot. At number 20 and staying steady is Edmonton. So Edmonton, again, you have your wins that occur this week, but other teams pass them, and then they've stayed the same. But there is hope in Edmonton. I do think that next week they'll be up in this row. I don't think they're going to fall between now and Christmas. They're 3 games below 500 on the actual standings, but they're playing much better than some teams that are ahead of them in terms of that 500 mark, which is Anaheim, Philly, Carolina. Vancouver's technically still ahead of them in terms of being having a better record, but Edmonton's playing better hockey. So Edmonton is at 20. At 19, and dropping by 2 this week, is San Jose. They get the win over Calgary. They get the overtime loss in Vancouver, and they had another loss before that this week. And again, it's teams behind them win, so they kind of get bumped down. They go 1-1-1 this week. And yet I will say this is the most dangerous number 19 team I think I've seen on the board all year. They should move up, but man, it is really hard to move up in this league. Elliot Friedman said tonight on Hockey Night in Canada, this league is brutal, and he's right. There are 31 good teams. Even these 2 teams down here, they're good teams. They just have more holes than the ones ahead of them, and that's why they get exposed on a regular basis. Number 18, moving up 1, is Chicago. Chicago's on a 4-game winning streak. They've been playing well. They move up by 1 spot. I do still have some lingering concerns where they are in terms of a few parts of their team, but they look good. I still don't necessarily like their defensive depth, their scoring depth, and if anything were to happen to Crawford again, I would have concern with Forsberg, but they're playing well enough that I've got them at 18. And there's definitely room here for them to move up, especially since some of the teams that are up here are dropping down. At number 17, one of those teams that is dropping down is Calgary. And if Calgary had gotten slaughtered by Nashville the same way that Vancouver did this week, Chicago would have passed them. But it was a good game. They did hit posts, which aren't shots on net, as I stated in tonight's reviews. But for me, the Flames are still good enough to be at 17 and avoid a further drop. But they could find themselves down in this row as early as next week. Remember, Anaheim, Philly, and Carolina are moving up. Edmonton's showing signs of moving up. San Jose and Chicago are better than where they are on this board right now. You could see Calgary as low as 23rd next week if they don't perform well in their games. Absolutely. At number 16 and dropping by 2 is Pittsburgh. I had them moving up early in the week, and then it's just sort of fallen apart. And I can't justify moving them up based on a last second, what it basically is a last second victory over the 31st ranked team on the board. Again, Pittsburgh has question marks. If they had lost to Arizona tonight, I think they'd be in panic. Either the fan base or the media. I'm not sure which. But I think there would be some panic. Pittsburgh's a middle-of-the-road team right now. They could miss the playoffs based on how strong that division is. Absolutely they could. Number 15. Moving up 3 spots is Minnesota. So they lose today to the Oilers, which dropped them down. I actually had Minnesota coming into today at 14th. So they lost Edmonton. I dropped them by 1. It's a 1-goal loss at home. It hurts. But to me, Minnesota has still played so well over the last few weeks that they are absolutely worthy of moving up 3 spots. They've been very, very good. I do think that Minnesota, it's going to come down, I think, between Minnesota and Chicago for that last playoff spot. It's starting to look that way. And that could be a hell of a battle down the stretch. But don't forget at number 14, they move up by 2 spots. They were higher than this coming into today, is Dallas. Dallas could fall back. I'm not saying that Dallas is incapable of falling back. Minnesota getting better, Chicago getting better. Dallas has to keep up. Bishop hasn't looked as good as Lettinen recently. Read into that what you will. I just think it's Lettinen went on a nice stretch because he was overdue for one. And Bishop, I really want to believe in him being a 60-plus games per year guy, but right now he looks like a goalie who's more comfortable playing 50, and you need a backup who can play 30 to 35. Remember, when I say 50 and 35, I am factoring in that there's going to be games where you pull your goaltender. I just mean overall games played, not just starts. So that's your bottom 3 rows. At number 13 and dropping, they dropped by 4, which is tied for the worst one, and that's Boston. Boston's results this week weren't bad. It's just that teams were better. I do think that Boston's in a very good position. Look how much further up they are than the potential contender in the Atlantic. I keep wanting to say Northeast. The Atlantic Division. Unless Ottawa goes on a run, unless Montreal figures it out again, and it gets harder and harder as the year goes along. You go on these winning streaks, you're like, all right, we're back in it, and then you start losing again. It can get really difficult to get back up and get back into it, especially when you're losing ground to Boston, who's ahead of you. And teams are losing ground to Boston. The problem is if they don't feel that pressure from below, I could see, especially the kids in Boston, kind of getting a little lackadaisical in some of their play. They have games in hand on everybody, which means that they have 2 things. 1, there's more potential points for Boston, and 2, they may have a very brutal schedule in the second half, which could tire them out going into the playoffs should they make it. There's 2 ways to look at those games in hand, and that's them. At number 12, and they dropped a spot from last week, is the New York Islanders. And I do this even though Josh Bailey had a hat trick, and that was a great story. And there are a lot of great stories right now with the New York Islanders. Goaltending is probably the only reason why they're no longer in this division, in this spot. They would still be in this top row if not for some spotty goaltending, and their scoring's been very good. I think their defense is good enough. I think they're good. Their defense is good enough for them to win. Nick Leddy is still playing really, really well. And Johnny Boychuk is, of course, one of my favorite defensemen of all time. And I still think the Islanders can get better. I just don't know when that'll happen. Soon, I would imagine. Number 11, New York Rangers, who moved up a spot. So they swapped positions this week. The Rangers swapped that position because they beat Boston in overtime. And Boston actually was here. So in reality, there was a bigger move than what it looks like when you look at week to week. Boston at one point this week was actually 8th on the power rankings. They've dropped back to 13th based on what teams across this board have done. And the Rangers, I've said tonight, they're in that conversation of maybe they are contenders. Lundqvist has been playing very well. We'll see where this ends up. So 11th. 10th, and this is where people are going to start getting into the comment section. I got Vegas raising 3 spots this week. So they lost this week. They lost to Carolina. And yet they moved up 3 spots. And the week before, I believe I had them move up 4. So they moved up 3 this week, even though they didn't have a record as good as the week before. And, again, this just shows that the power rankings don't care so much about who's where in the standings. And, it kind of has a mind of its own. A big game coming up for them with Tampa. I will say right now, if they can beat Tampa at home, they will bust their way into the top 7. No doubt in my mind. They are in the right spot. Of course, 2 weeks ago, they were 17th. Right now, they're 10th. They're gradually pushing their way up. The way I have this structured, you can't just suddenly become really good or suddenly become really bad. If so, and I've said this before, this board becomes useless. Completely useless. Number 9, dropping 3 spots, Toronto. So for Vegas, passing Toronto is a matter of Toronto losing their next game, Vegas winning their next game, and that's done. Toronto loses 3 this week. So they dropped 1 spot for each loss. And I know there's concerns about Austin Matthews. I haven't heard anything yet about what he has, what's going on with Matthews, why he's out, which has to be concerning. If it was something really, really minor, they'd tell us. At the start, they said, minor, no big deal. They're not saying that now. Toronto I could see them falling as low as here with a bad week, or here. Toronto could find themselves that far down. A good week can absolutely propel them back to that 6th spot. It's going to be really hard to get into the top 5, and we'll get into that. Number 8, dropping 1 spot this week, Winnipeg. They had a very, very solid game. Carter Hutton shut them out tonight, but Winnipeg on the road is a concern. Their road record is absolutely a concern. They play well at home. Their road record is why they're in 8th rather than being at the top of the board. They would be in the top 4 if they could win more games on the road. No doubt in my mind. The Winnipeg Jets, I still see them as a playoff team. I don't know how far they go. I've said that before. I'll say it again. I don't know how far they'll go. Number 7, and they're falling by 2 spots from last week, is Columbus. Now, if they hadn't won a game this week, they'd be down to probably 10th. But they did win a game this week. Columbus stays in 7th as a result, but there are a lot of concerns in Columbus. That power play is starting to cost them because goal scoring's come down. Now the goal scoring's come down league-wide. Special teams likely will play more of a role in games. They have to get that power play going. They have to get Cam Atkinson going. They have to make sure that Nick Foligno is putting out the kind of numbers he can. But Atkinson is a major issue right now for Columbus in terms of production. He's got to get that production back or they will fall out of this ranking on the board. And I know everybody loves Tortorella and Tortorella's changed his tune in Columbus, but if Columbus were to somehow collapse their way out of the playoffs, you can't trade the players, so the coach is usually one to lose his job. Number 6, and they dropped 3 spots. It's funny because LA was poised to become number 1. That 8-game winning streak, they were poised to get right up to that number 1 spot. And they didn't. And they lost again tonight. They lost in overtime to the Islanders, and they're down to 6th. Again, when you look at teams that are winning down here, and again I'm pointing at Vegas on this one, the difference between these teams is not that great. And absolutely a good week here lands them here. Potentially a good week here could land them here, but I have my doubts. Because again, it depends who you beat, by how much. Is it overtime? Is it a shootout? I've gone into these things before. Number 5 and up by 5 points. New Jersey largely has picked up all of these spots because Winnipeg keeps losing, Toronto lost, the Kings lost, and Columbus lost. So for New Jersey, who started at 10th this week, they keep moving up because their results are better than the results of the teams that were ahead of them and now are behind them. And I really think Jersey's full value for that spot. I even did some math today. I looked at this board before tonight's games and I was like, wow, Jersey's 5th? If everything goes the right way tonight, and I thought, how can Jersey be 5th? So I looked at some of the other records of the other teams, and I was like, no, that's accurate. That works. I second guessed the board too, and then I look back on the week's results and I'm like, no, that works. At number 4, and rising 4 spots, is the Capitals. Don't look now, boys and girls. The Washington Capitals are inserting themselves into President's Trophy territory. Have we seen this before? I feel like 3 times in the last decade they've won the President's Trophy, and it has been the bane of their existence. I'm really surprised to see them going on a run. Last year at around this time, I said, well, Washington won't win the President's Trophy again because they're going to want to save some for the playoffs. They know that overachieving in the regular season and collapsing in the playoffs is their whole thing. So they'll probably pace themselves and they'll make sure everybody's rested. And no, they went all out. They won the President's Trophy and they collapsed in the playoffs again. The Capitals are getting closer than I think any of us thought they would to potentially winning another President's Trophy. Insert your own joke here at your own peril. Number 3, down a spot from last week, is St. Louis. The Blues, again, that 48 save shutout against Winnipeg keeps them at number 3. Most of this week's results have kept the top 3 the same. There's been movement below the top 3, but the top 3 have largely remained the same this week. St. Louis dropped to 3 after they lost that game against Anaheim. Outside of that, there's been no reason to drop them further down that I've seen. If you're a Blues fan, you got to feel good about where they're standing right now. Again, the Blues are also known for the last time they won the President's Trophy not necessarily going very far, but don't just view that as a jinx. Just view it as we're the best team in the regular season and go for it based on that, which may be what Washington is doing as well. It is a brutal division they're in, as I've said before, and St. Louis is as good as anybody else in the division right now, which includes the number 2 team on the list, Nashville. I watched Nashville go into Calgary tonight and handle them. The Flames, who were coming off of a loss against San Jose, this team here, they had a lot of fire in them. Vegas snuffed that out. Nashville snuffed that out. For Vegas, Nashville. I'm looking at my jersey. For Nashville, tonight's result was despite the fact that Potato and Austin Watson committed some rather questionable plays. And no, I'm not going to do a video on them because I don't see any kind of discipline from the NHL coming down. They might give Watson a game, but I don't think so. They might give Potato a fine or something, but I don't think that'll warrant that either. Nashville comes out of Western Canada with 3 wins. And number 1, they almost lost that spot tonight. If Colorado would come back and won that game, Nashville would be back at first. Tampa would have been second. But they held on, they won it, and by the skin of their teeth, Tampa is still the number 1 team on this power rankings. They've won 6 in a row, much like Philly down here, and they're doing it with style. They are playing very, very solid hockey right now. Outside of the third period against Colorado tonight, I can't think of very many blemishes on their record. And they just have so many offensive weapons. Their defense is better than it's given credit for. And Vasilevsky, when he's in net, has been lights out, which is good because Budaj has not been. I said it in tonight's review video. I'm wondering if Tampa's going to make a move when it comes to goaltending. I don't have any ears in that franchise to know what's going to happen, but Budai was a surprise for me coming into this season. I thought Godlevskis would get a shot at the backup job. Godlevskis has never worked at the NHL level, I guess. So we'll see what they do, if anything. But there you go. There's the power rankings for Week 10. And Tampa stays at number 1. The biggest risers with a +5 is New Jersey. With +4s are Washington, Anaheim, Philly, Carolina. The biggest droppers with -4s are Montreal, Boston, and that's it. So congratulations, Buffalo. You're no longer the worst team in the league. And for Florida, they've got to get some more wins to pull themselves out of where they're at. But again, it is a very, very competitive league. It's very hard to do this week to week. And again, I always look at the board before I do this and go, wait a minute, seriously? And I always second guess. So it's not just guys out there who second guess. I second guess it myself and then go back and check my math, and it works. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through and wondering what this guy's talking about. And for anybody wondering about the ones that I don't have the logos for yet, that's something I'll work on in the coming week. That's only 3 teams left. That's Ottawa, Edmonton, and Colorado. There's no specific reason why those 3 teams are the ones I don't have the logos for, other than I don't have the logos for them. It's that simple. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.